Remember, you can have fun with your projects. Not everything has to be professional, and I got to use clips from LMFAO videos and all sorts of things, and honestly, I think this project was a little before its time. Side note for anyone posting online, speaking of thirst traps, do you remember back in season 1, episode 12, I had helped a friend make a school project that somehow turned out better than my own? Yeah, that happened again. So today's lesson is not every project will be yours, but make sure the ones you help create have your name on them. I ended up involved in 3 film projects around the same time, so I'm going to break them up into separate episodes so I don't overwhelm you by jumping back and forth between them. I took a class called Our Monsters Ourselves. I mentioned it briefly back in season 2, episodes 3 and 4, and it was absolutely fascinating. The main concept was to get a more accurate view of history and what people feared during that time period, look at the horror stories they tell. For example, we read Dracula by Bram Stoker and learned about Victorian-era fears around promiscuous people and blood-borne diseases. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley exposed the fear that surgery and medicine clashed with religious ideas that healing should be divine and not experimental. You know, that sort of thing. So my final paper was on Wagner the Werewolf by George William MacArthur Reynolds and how society was intrigued by the idea of extending lifespans through science, but terrified of the potential consequences of doing that. And for my final project, I made a video about a computer virus, and I drew inspiration from works like iRobot, Artificial Intelligence, The Matrix, and BioShock, in which science or technology kind of rebels against its makers or surpasses its intended use. But my roommate Kay, who was taking the same class, had a much more fun project that he asked for my help with. He wanted to make a fictional documentary about a viral dance trend that became physically infectious. And I got to use clips from LMFAO videos and all sorts of things because this wasn't a project we were putting in film festivals. It was just a school project, so we could really mess around with it and not worry about it as much. Remember, you can have fun with your projects. Not everything has to be professional, but social media trends can creep into your free time, so be careful about what you're doing creatively. I interviewed a couple of classmates and friends to create a storyline, so it's kind of a cool time capsule for the ALN crew. It also shows how much I struggled with lighting back then. My old camera just wasn't built for low light conditions. But as they talked, it became more about how celebrities, social media, and music videos influence people to learn the same dances, and how fans often hear celebrity opinions presented as objective truth through the guise of entertainment. And honestly, I think this project was a little before its time. Looking back at it now, we were basically predicting TikTok dance trends, but years before TikTok came out. It was on platforms like YouTube and Instagram and other social media networks beforehand, and will be after, due to the star power that actors, musicians, and social media influencers have. Think about it. How much time have we all lost while chasing trends, mimicking influencers, or just watching it all unfold online? Today, people use dance trends on social media to make money, gain followers, and even sometimes, unfortunately, profit off of their children in ways that weren't even possible back in 2012. It's become a lot cringier, sometimes a lot more sexual, and much higher stakes than when I was a kid. The only dances I ever performed were high school dances or talent shows, Thriller and All the Single Ladies if you're curious, neither of which was very sexual at all. But today, it doesn't seem uncommon for someone to try to recreate a dance to follow a trend, but then they get bullied online for either, doing it poorly, doing it at all, or posting it as a thirst trap. It's very different from the experience I grew up with, but in my opinion, our mockumentary still kind of rings true. Side note for anyone posting online, speaking of thirst traps, keep in mind the uncomfortable truth around dance videos and suggestive content. A lot of people underestimate just how many men masturbate to those videos. So be careful about what you post and just kind of think about why people would want to watch it. Because a lot of people will believe that your online persona is who you are in real life and treat you like that. Anyway, December 5th was our presentation day for Our Monsters Ourselves, and each of us presented our projects. I believe I was the only one to work on 2 projects, other than the friends and classmates we'd gotten to appear in the video, and I believe that may have boosted their grades a little as well. Looking back on it, I put way more time and effort into his project than my own because I wasn't really that interested in my topic. Now, I didn't get in trouble for this because I'm sure Professor Durbin saw my name plastered all over the credits and took that into account. I'd obviously put a lot of work into it, but my 35-second presentation video paled in comparison to the 5.5-minute documentary I'd made with my roommate. I guess I hadn't learned my lesson from the Season 1, Episode 12 experience exactly, but I'd done this because I'd wanted to, despite the consequences. However, because I was older, it actually had a more positive effect than it had when I was in high school. But it is incredibly important to have your name attached to your work. If there hadn't been credits on the end of that video, the professor wouldn't have known that I'd shot and cut that together, and I would have been graded exclusively on my own project, which wasn't nearly as good. Accreditation is something I've taken very seriously throughout my career, and it's one of the reasons why I became so familiar with IMDb and registered as many titles as I have, so that I could make sure that everyone who worked on these films got credited in an easily verifiable way. Fun fact, ironically, while working on that project, Alex Hackworth had gotten me involved in a video he was making for the college called Gangnam Poets Style, and it's exactly what you're expecting. A music video to Gangnam Style made entirely on campus using Whittier College students and staff. I wasn't there for most of the production for that one, but I was a camera operator on the big dance scene that Dub C Dance, the dance team, performed in Club 88, and that was when I really saw the potential to shoot a scene for Carpe Diem there. The music video itself had its cringy moments.
Whittier College campus 18.
Open Gangnam Style!
But the dance team pulled it off well, especially given how rushed the turnaround time was for that project. But basically, while shooting a mockumentary about people getting caught up in dance crazes online, I helped shoot a music video that was part of a dance craze online. It was such a perfect compare and contrast situation that I used some of the footage I'd shot for the music video in the mockumentary.
Called the Gangnam Style. And I remember that one just hit the fan just this summer. A lot of people just found out about it. It's crazy that even people internationally can come to American society and just totally push its dance craze onto the Americans. And you see them, everybody knows the dance.
I'll talk more about this later, but after my accident, that contradiction in my behavior made it hard to figure out how I really felt about things back then. Would I make fun of the situation or join in? Well, apparently both. But what does that mean about who I was? Storytime. So I try to avoid relationship details as much as possible, but this part is actually important to my life and career trajectory. I was still dating Selena Welling long distance back then, and on November 15th, she purchased her plane ticket to spend Christmas with my family. But sometime after she'd bought the ticket, she found out that she wouldn't be able to return to LA in May on a student visa like she'd planned, and she would have to stay in London. Up until that point, our relationship had still been pretty solid, but now there was a big question mark on our future. Obviously, we'd be seeing each other again in December, but what would happen after that? All it would take was a few photos and bad timing to escalate this issue quite a bit. You see, the ALN crew posted photos on Facebook from that Halloween party that I mentioned back in Season 3, Episode 8, and a sports-themed party called Club MVP, with everyone posing in their costumes. And Selena had asked me about them. I'd said something vague like, oh, they're from Halloween, but I couldn't get into the details right away because she'd asked just when I'd started setting up film equipment for another Backpack to Briefcase panel that I had to shoot. That one was about careers in technology. One of the panelists used Google Hangout and a projector so that he could speak on the panel while he was overseas. And it made sense that people speaking about tech careers would be using technology more than others, but it was an interesting challenge for me because I'd never had to record a projected image like that before. If you're curious, I figured out that I needed to drop down the f-stops a little bit, increase contrast, increase saturation, and remove a lot of blue while I was color grading so that it would look more natural. But for the 2 hours or so that I had to focus on this unusual shoot for Backpack to Briefcase, what had started out as simple curiosity had changed into nervousness and maybe even suspicion about why I'd been so short with her and hadn't answered the question she'd asked about the photos. Back when we knew being long distance had an end date, 5 months to go, it wouldn't have felt like such a big deal. But now that we were long distance indefinitely, with no plans for her to move back to the States or for me to move overseas, it intensified the fears that one of us might be moving on. I did my best to do damage control, but those fears would linger and only increase as time went on. But you'll have to tune in next week to hear about a frat party that definitely didn't put those fears at ease.
Okay, well, with Lady Gaga, she's very powerful if you really think about it, because she's weird. She's really weird. And people look up to her because other people are really weird. And, you know, she's like Jesus. And she does the weirdest stuff. I mean, she wore a meat dress. Who wears a meat dress? I want to now.
These are just dances, come out of nowhere. The lyrics are just really provocative.
The best way to describe this phenomenon is that it starts out as something